Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Implementation of the 2024 OMB Uniform Guidance. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters from Moss Adams. And with that, I will turn it over to Anita to get us started. Anita?
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. I'm Anita Shah. I'm a partner at Moss Adams, and I've been working on single audits for almost 17 years now. I'm also a single audit technical reviewer for our firm, and have provided a lot of trainings on uniform guidance over the years. I'm excited to be here today. Matt?
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Dinsdale. I'm the Senior Manager here at Moss Adams. I've also been working with clients and others for over 15 years on single audit and other compliance matters. I'm also part of our single audit technical review group and assist in developing not only sessions like this, but different tools and tips for our clients and people.
Thank you, Matt. So now I'll get started on providing you some background and context about the Uniform Guidance. So in December of 2014, 10 years ago, OMB issued the Uniform Guidance, which is the 2 CFR 200, and that superseded OMB A133, a bunch of other circulars, A122, A110, A87, and basically we called it the super circular at the time. What they did, the idea behind this was OMB wanted to streamline federal regulations, reduce administrative burden on both grant recipients and federal agencies, and to reduce, their aim was to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse by doing these. Now, 10 years later, after trial and error in a lot of different ways, they issued significant revisions in April of 2024 to the Uniform Guidance. The focus is more so on furthering reducing administrative burden, both for federal agencies and clarifying more of the guidance so that recipients can read it in plain language. So it's not it's not too complicated. They wanted to make it more clear for people. They also wanted to clarify between recipients and subrecipients. Instead of just saying this applies to non-federal entities, they have added more guidance to specifically note whether this certain regulation applies to recipients or subrecipients. Technically, this guidance was supposed to be effective for all awards issued on or after October 1st, 2024. But in the latter half of our presentation here, we'll be talking more about the implementation, and there's a caveat to that. So we'll talk more about that here shortly. So we'll get started for CPE purposes with the polling question.
All right, thanks, Anita. Poll number 1, how familiar are you with OMB Uniform Guidance revisions? A, this is my first webcast on the topic. B, somewhat familiar, but curious about more details. C, very familiar, but I need the CPE. I'll give you a few moments to respond. To participate, please click the button next to the answer you choose and hit submit. All right, we'll give people just a few more moments. And here are the results.
Great. This is about what we were expecting. Most people have heard about it, but they're curious about more of the details. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt now.
All right. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about the overall revisions to the Uniform Guidance. You may have attended the webcast back earlier in the year where this was announced, and they talked mostly about the overall plan for this, these revisions. The overall plan is to really increase transparency, equity, readability, clarity, and allow for a more competitive environment on not only applying these items to the NOFOs, to the Notice of Funding Opportunities, but also reducing the burden overall. So part of that is these Notice of Funding Opportunities, I'll refer to as NOFOs, have been limited in length and information requested. Previously, you needed really an army of accountants and attorneys to kind of decipher some of the information in these, and it reduced the competitiveness to only those that have the means to do that type of work and include all the information that was required and respond effectively. So now it's a little bit easier for folks, different organizations and governments and tribes to respond to these opportunities. This is especially true for programs that have limited capacity, programs for employment, training development, and of course, strengthening U.S. infrastructure. If you look into the new update, they have provided a template, so you can find that new NOFO template to see an example of what it looks like. Some of you may have already responded to some of these new NOFOs as October 1st was the implementation date, but they start implementing them more so in FY 2025, which again just started last month. Also, kind of interesting and good thing to see is the wider adoption of some websites. So grants.gov, Build America, Buy America. There's a couple websites that are now actually referred to in the literature that accumulate these types of opportunities. So you can easily go on, search for the type of opportunity, the type of organization that you're representing, and see what's out there pretty easily, and see the amount of the opportunity and things like that, and download those NOFOs. So overall, it's making it a lot easier for folks, and that was the intent, really the intent of these updates. A couple important things to note regarding post-award revisions. So there is increased focus on the FFATA reporting, the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act reporting. This came around a number of years ago, but there was kind of a lot of organizations weren't either following it, weren't sending in those reports, that information, and there was an issue with accuracy in a lot of situations. So the new revisions really press hard the need to submit these reports, submit this data, and ensure it's accurate. So you can go on and see some of what these core data elements are, things like your subawards, obviously, and salaries and things like that are included in this reporting. Also, this is good news to a lot, but 9-month deadline extensions are now allowed when there's undue burden. So I'll kind of reiterate that undue burden. You're not talking about, somebody left the organization or, kind of things like that. It's more of, hey, a hurricane went through and we lost all our data or things like that. But it's never a bad idea to ask when you do need an extension, and that's really managed by the organization's main funder. So your cognizant agency is who you'll want to go to request these types of items. So there's that option for you. Program income, this has always been a requirement, but again, it's just a kind of a focus on this to make sure that you're requesting your program income generated from your grants prior to requesting additional federal funds. So that should be first, and then federal funds come second. So make sure that when you're drawing funds, you're considering that along with everything else you have to consider. All right. Other changes based on thresholds, of course, good news for a lot of folks that have a little bit of funding that fall between $750,000 and $1 million. If you, starting in fiscal years that begin on or after October 1st, 2024, which is for your fiscal years ending September 30, 2025 and later. For those fiscal years, your new single audit threshold will be $1 million. So if you're, usually when you get towards the end of the year, you want to really track and manage your spending to try to get underneath that, you now have a different goal to hit. So $1 million is a new threshold. It's also the threshold for those that are familiar with the audit side of things and how we select our major programs as auditors. Type A threshold, which is just a threshold for your larger programs, has been also moved up to $1 million. So you'll want to pay attention to any programs that hover around that $1 million mark starting October 1st for year ends starting out on or after October 1st. Those are the programs that will significantly impact which programs are selected for testing during the single audit. So that, again, that's moved from $750,000 up to $1 million. Also, there was a change to the exclusion of subawards within your modified total direct cost calculation. Previously, it was the first $25,000 of each subaward or contract, and now it's $50,000 for each subaward and contract. So that essentially means you get to collect a bit more, twice as much essentially on your indirect cost portions of your contracts. And of course, the de minimis rate has moved from 10 to 15%. There's not a lot of folks out there that utilize this rate, but just make a note of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that's adopted and applied for your organization in a bit. But again, 10% is moved up to 15%. For a lot of you, this may just mean ensuring that your footnote to your schedule of expenditures of federal awards is updated from that 10% figure to that 15% figure, as that's a required disclosure for your CFA. So, all right. Moving on, other threshold changes. Excuse me. The unused supplies threshold has been increased from $5,000 to $10,000, and your equipment threshold has been moved from $5,000 to $10,000. I think the equipment threshold has probably been the most popular question I've received on how this change is made on the recipient side of things. I'll also say the 10,000 threshold is there unless the specific grant or contract requires a lower threshold. So keep that in mind. It's looking like, based on the information we have at this point, that 10,000 threshold change applies on a contract or a grant by grant basis. So if you've been tracking 5,000 and more on all your previous grants, and now you have a new one, a new grant for $10,000, and now you're tracking those 10,000, you have to keep tracking those $5,000 and more equipment items for the time being until we get some more information or revisions to the existing guidance about this. So don't just stop tracking your equipment between 5,000 and 10,000. You want to keep looking at those and doing the annual or biannual inventories and all those tracking requirements that you're required to follow for your equipment. So your own organizational capitalization threshold, which is independent from the equipment threshold, this is not going to change, right? You'll still follow your own organization's policy. You may want to change your policy if that's something that makes sense to you based on your own kind of processes. That's something you have to talk about internally, but it's not required to follow exactly the other thresholds. So just a note on that. Okay. So reminders on policy revisions, probably the most work you'll have related to this is going to be changing your policies and making sure they reflect these new rules. So of course your equipment policy and your capitalization policy will need to be changed based on those of you with federally purchased equipment. So don't forget to change that. Supplies policies will need to be changed. There were significant changes to the procurement policy for tribal nations. So those of you that represent tribal nations, make sure you're revising your policy as needed for those changes. There are other policies, there are other impacts to the procurement policy, such as, veteran-owned businesses can now be a preference. And so if that's something important to you, make sure that you are considering those changes when you go through your policies this year. The use of program income, as I referenced earlier, and internal controls will need to be revised to make sure that you're considering cybersecurity measures to protect personally identifiable information. So I'll take a moment to talk about that. It's important. So now with the new revisions and the internal control components of the new revisions, there is specific mention of the need to make sure you have cybersecurity controls in place. As everybody knows by now, this is becoming an increasingly significant risk to a lot of entities out there as continued increases in breaches happen and the fines and penalties for having a breach continue to increase and become more severe. You really need to make sure you're paying close attention to those. Consider things like pen testing, multi-factor authentication, the policies in place around taking these actions, and of course training your folks and what to do. If somebody may not pass a pen testing, how you train them to make sure they do pass it in the future. So all these types of things you'll need to make sure that you consider as part of your revisions to your policies. Prizes, this is an interesting one. So previously cost of prizes or challenges were unallowable, but they are now allowable if they have a direct programmatic purpose and are included in the federal award. So make sure that those two stipulations are there before you start charging those types of costs to your grants. It's only in those situations. It's not a broad allowability now. So they have to be part of that purpose. And your auditors are going to, if they see prize or something like that in their testing, that's going to pop out a big red flag, and they're going to want to know more about the programmatic purpose of that cost. So, all right, looks like we have a question.
Great. Yes, poll number 2. Will the increased thresholds have an impact to your organization? A, yes, the increased thresholds will have a significant impact to us, will reduce our administrative burden. B, no, the increased thresholds won't have a significant impact to us. C, somewhat of an impact. D, not sure yet. As a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. All right, and we'll give everyone just a few more moments to respond. And here are the results.
All right, thank you. Looks like most of you think the increased thresholds won't have a significant impact, and that's probably because, or somewhat of an impact, just because probably you receive way more than $1 million, right? All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Anita for the next session.
Thanks, Matt. So now the OMB issued specific guidelines for tribal nations. I have 4 slides specifically talking to those of you who will work with tribal governments or tribal entities on the call today to go over those specific impacts to tribal nations. So first of all, OMB has directed federal agencies to encourage more compacting and contracting. You already have this with a lot of your BIA and IHS programs, but they're also recommending other federal agencies to do more to promote more of that, more contracting, compacting, and co-management of grants and contracts. They've also encouraged federal agencies to provide tribal set-asides, remove some unnecessary limitations, reduce administrative burden wherever appropriate, and really respect tribal data sovereignty. You saw during the pandemic, the Treasury Department did quite a bit of self-certifications for the ARPA and CARES funding, and they're encouraging more federal agencies to do more of that so that they can, you can easily provide that data so that it goes with the spirit of the entire OMB Uniform Guidance revisions, of trying to provide more access to this funding to those entities that don't always have proper staffing to make sure that they can access funding easily. And then really just, create more equity and utility of the federal funding amongst those of you that haven't been, those entities that haven't been receiving this funding, and support programs, because the objective of these federal programs is to provide services to individuals. So specifically for tribal nations, similar to states, now OMB is allowing tribal governments to follow their own procurement policy. But if you don't have your own procurement policy, you will have to follow the Uniform Guidance policy. So if you do have your procurement policy, or if you decide to revise your procurement policy, you no longer have to follow the uniform guidelines of identifying specific procurement thresholds, like the micro purchase and small purchase thresholds, the simplified acquisition threshold. You no longer have to follow those if your policy dictates your own thresholds. Similarly with methods too, you can choose to decide how you want to go about going through procurement processes, and you can document that in your own policy. Uniform Guidance has 4 specific areas of when sole source justifications are allowed, and now you don't have to follow that if your policy has other sole source justifications, and you don't need to necessarily follow those exact four types. They also removed prohibition on using geographic preferences. This is something that they had added back in 2014 and decided that, this is not helpful, because then you're not providing, you may be missing out on providing contracts or awarding contracts to your local economy. So this is really helpful for those tribes in Alaska and tribes just across the U.S. in rural areas. You don't have that prohibition on geographic preferences. The one thing that they do stipulate is that your policies, if you do have your own policies, they must follow the same policies as your non-federal funds. So as your general fund, your hard dollar funds, your policies should be the same across the board. And then one thing I'm always surprised by when I'm talking to my tribal governments is that their indirect cost pool, your costs that go into the indirect cost pool are not subject to Uniform Guidance procurement standards. So if you do update your policy, you may want to include that in your policy as well, that your indirect cost pool is not subject to that, because you're kind of you're adding more stringent requirements to yourself when you don't need to. So again, similar to states, tribal governments can now use, manage, and dispose of equipment in accordance with their own tribal laws and procedures. In absence of any written laws or procedures, so if you don't have policies on this, you have to follow the Uniform Guidance policy, similar to the procurement, what procurement says about that as well. However, subrecipients of a state and a tribe have to follow the Uniform Guidance policies. So if you do issue subawards to entities, you'll want to make sure that they do follow the Uniform Guidance policies. What this means is that you can now create your own policy on following or how you use your equipment that's purchased with federal funds, how you manage it, how you track it. The biannual physical inventory is now something that you can decide to revise in your own policy, and how you dispose of equipment and what you do with the disposition of equipment. That's something, again, can be in accordance with your own policies. One thing I want to caveat is that the equipment threshold that Matt talked about, that's going from from $5,000 currently to the new threshold. For non-tribal nations, it is going to $10,000. However, for tribal nations, your policy can now dictate what you want the threshold to be in terms of at what level of dollar amount you want to start tracking, managing equipment that's purchased with federal funds. However, I just want to make sure you all know this, that the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act, or also called Public Law 93638, that still has the $5,000 threshold for equipment. So for purchases that you make with that funding, you'll want to make sure you're still following that $5,000. So I would recommend you review all of your awards, whether it's HUD or any other awards, to make sure that they don't have any specific policies. They don't have a lower threshold than what you're deciding in your new policy. With that, we have another polling question.
Thanks, Anita. Polling question number 3. Do you plan to make changes to your policies for the Uniform Guidance revisions? A, yes, we will be revising our policies. B, yes, we have already updated our policies. C, no, our policies are current. D, not sure yet. For those of you that would like a copy of today's slide deck, you can download them from the folder that says Slide Deck and Handouts. We will also be sending the slides via email after the webcast. All right, and we'll give people just a few more moments to respond. And here are the results.
That's great to hear that you'll be revising your policies, because I would love for you all to take advantage of the broader flexibility provided under the Uniform Guidance. The whole idea of these revisions is to reduce administrative burden. So anything you can do to help reduce your administrative burden, that would be great. Matt?
All right. Thanks, Anita. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about agency implementation. All right. For existing awards, the OMB is strongly encouraging agencies to apply these revisions to amendments for existing awards made on or after October 1st, 2024. So this applies to when the award is actually made, not when the NOFO comes out or anything like that. So when that award's made, that's when these revisions are supposed to be applied by the federal agency. So good reminder that the OMB has put out this new regulation, or these revisions to the regulation, but the individual departments, the federal agencies, are required to adopt them and then apply them to their existing or new grants. So these revisions will generally apply prospectively. Agencies are allowed specific provisions to apply them to retrospectively to existing awards, with the specific instruction that only if it reduces that burden. So they can't, if something creates more burden and they want to apply it, they cannot do that. So the only specific items that reduce burden can be applied retrospectively. So the adoption of the revisions should not be a surprise. So they must be amendments for existing awards must generally be executed by agreement with the recipient. So they can't just tell you to apply them, right? There has to be an executed agreement in place, or some sort of amendment to that agreement or that grant that allows for these revisions to be applied. So this should not be a surprise to you as a recipient. All right. For new awards, so federal agency must take appropriate steps to ensure these revisions are effective for all awards entered into on or after October 1st, 2024. So they have to take the appropriate steps in summary. Everything from the NOFO templates to award notifications, terms and conditions, and program documents should be updated to reflect the 2024 revisions. So, excuse me, so, they've had half a year, before October 1st implementation date to make all these changes. And so you should see these now flowed through to you as recipients in the form of new documents and new terminology within the agreements. When you look at a grant agreement, you see the different circulars that apply to you and different CFRs that you need to look at terms and conditions. Those should be all updated for the individual entities or the individual agencies, and they should be referenced in your new documents. They cannot be selectively applied, so they have to be, all the different revisions have to be applied in full. They can't just pick and choose which ones make sense to them, and that's to prevent, an agency from circumventing the kind of the general thought and purpose of this, which is to increase transparency and reduce burden. All right. For subawards, so this is important if you are a pass-through entity, if you are receiving grants and passing them to the other organizations or governments, you cannot apply these revisions until the federal agency has applied the revision to the existing award. So you can't make a decision to apply these to awards already in place before October 1st. You have to make sure that prime contract or that prime grant document already includes reference to these revisions, and these revisions apply to it. So when a federal agency amends an award for the 2024 revisions, you must also amend your subawards for those revisions as well. So that's going to take some planning and hopefully some early discussion with your prime awardee to ensure you're expecting that, and you can make those necessary changes for your subawardees too. And again, they should not be surprising you with this. So it's something that they should have already communicated, so you can make these changes yourself. All right, now we're going to toss it back to Anita.
Thanks, Matt. So for indirect costs, what OMB has told federal agencies is that they must apply the new modified direct cost base for submissions on or after October 1st, 2024. So for any indirect cost proposals that you're submitting, now onwards, October 1st onwards, they're asking you that federal agencies must allow for you to use that modified total direct cost base. So you can use 50,000 of the first 50,000 of the contract in your base. Also, what OMB has told federal agencies is that federal agencies can choose at their discretion using the de minimis rates, that increased de minimis rate of 15%, that was up from 10%, to existing awards only after there's been amendments. Like Matt mentioned, there needs to be an amendment before you apply these new revisions. After you've received that amendment, then from that date onwards, you can start applying that 15% to your cost, to 15% indirect cost. However, you cannot retroactively apply the 15% to costs incurred before that amendment occurred, that amendment was agreed to. So the same concept, like Matt was talking about earlier, they're not allowing you to retroactively apply any of these until federal agencies have provided this in a written revised amendment to you all that you all agree with as well. For single audit extensions, it was this was kind of surprising when OMB issued this guidance to federal agencies, because if you read just the revisions to uniform guidance, it says that now there can be, when there's undue burden put on an entity, you can apply for you can apply for an extension to beyond that 9-month reporting submission deadline. However, what OMB has told federal agencies is that that justification for an extension of what they consider to be an undue burden constitutes here, that I have in quotes here, a substantial and unjust obstacle to timely submission of the report. So what they're saying is that you can't just ask for an extension just so that you can maintain your low-risk auditee status and you're not able to meet the deadline at the last minute. So the things that cognizant agencies would consider to be an obstacle, an unjust, substantial and unjust obstacle, when they're evaluating your justification, they're going to see if anything could have been avoided or overcome by either the auditee or the auditor through planning and reasonable due diligence. So this is a little surprising, because what they're saying is that not only is the auditee responsible for providing this, the auditee needs to get information from the auditor to also explain why this is a substantial and unjust obstacle. So like Matt mentioned, turnover in your finance department of one person would probably not consider that to be a substantial and unjust obstacle. Another thing that they're going to be looking at is if this, your justification of an unjust obstacle also affected other project delivery and other performance activities beyond just the audit process. So was there, like Matt mentioned, was there a hazard that occurred, an external factor that was out of your control? Or was there a huge reason why you had turnover, your entire finance department turned over, and that's huge, substantial and unjust obstacle. So they're going to look at various different things. They haven't provided us examples as to what they consider, like in what scenarios as examples that they haven't provided us. However, it will be a case-by-case basis, and you'll need to talk to your cognizant agency about the justification that you provide when you're asking for an extension. So when the Uniform Guidance revisions were first released in April, it was kind of a sigh of relief that they're finally going back to allowing for extensions, because 10 years ago, when the Uniform Guidance was first issued, they had put the kibosh on extensions. They said they're not going to allow any more extensions. So 10 years later, they're finally allowing it, but they are doing it, it seems like in very few, it probably will be very limited to few scenarios, and we'll know more as cognizant agencies provide more clarity on what they consider to be a substantial and unjust obstacle. So now talking about the compliance side of things, like Matt mentioned, there are some awards that will follow the Uniform Guidance revisions for new awards onward. So all new awards entered into on or after October 1st, 2024, they're going to implement all of the guidelines. But they're probably not all agencies are going to allow that. Also, not all agencies are going to revise their existing awards that you may have entered into before October 1st. They might not do revisions to it. They may not do amendments to it. So you will have to navigate these different complexities on basically looking at different guidelines, following different guidelines on a case-by-case basis for your different federal awards. One of the agencies, HHS agency, and you can, when you get these slides, you can click on that green link and that shows that what Department of Health and Human Services is doing to adopt these guidelines. What they've said is that because of the timing of those guidelines, because in accordance with their statutes, they want to go through a consultation process of adopting these changes, HHS is only implementing a few of the revisions of the 2024 Uniform Guidance revisions for all of their new awards that are effective October 1st onwards, but they're leaving the remaining provisions of the, of the Uniform Guidance to apply effective October 1st, 2025. That makes it super confusing for entities and for auditors to navigate which revisions they're going to be applying, which revisions will be applicable for the new awards and what are they doing about their existing awards. There will likely be more agencies that take a similar approach. We don't know yet because not all agencies have codified their guidelines. But given that it's November 7th and they haven't codified, not all agencies have codified these new uniform guidance revisions, it would not be surprising to us if other agencies do a similar thing where either they don't adopt everything this year or they only adopt it for awards going forward and not make any changes to previous awards. Whatever they do, federal agencies are required to clearly communicate their requirements, their changes to each federal award to the entities. So if you are unsure about something, we highly recommend you reach out to your awarding official to get clarification on the compliance requirements with the terms and conditions for each federal award. They should be communicating to you. We also heard that federal agencies are getting bombarded with a lot of these questions too, because things have not been clarified yet. And again, similar to HHS, we would not be surprised if there are agencies that are going to implement some of this at a later time. For systematic changes that are entity-wide changes, basically. So, for example, increasing your equipment threshold. You can still do that, but you'll just need to be careful to understand your federal awards. I don't want you to have to limit your organization to going with the lowest common denominator, because that's not the spirit of these revisions. The spirit was to create or to reduce administrative burden. What I would recommend for the threshold increases, whether it's equipment or unused supplies, or for tribal nations increasing your procurement levels, when you're updating your policy, include something in your policies that does incorporate language, recognizing that if there are other certain federal awards that have a lower threshold, you would follow that. The way to successfully implement this is to make sure you are providing adequate training to your program managers, directors, finance and accounting team members, your governing body members, and whoever is involved in the grant cycle process at your organization, that you're providing them the training that they need to make sure they review their awards. And there will be times where two awards provided for the same program may be following two different requirements. So and your policies too, making sure that they're aware of your policies, and your policies are not a blanket policy, but it does say that they'll recognize that they'll follow the federal requirements if it is a different threshold. Call out nuances in your policies to make sure that you're also, you're staying in compliance with these requirements, but you're not going into the ring with one hand tied behind your back. You're making sure that you're also providing this flexibility to your entities. I know this seems very tricky and very complex, but I promise you, for those of you who've been working with grants in the government world, especially in non-for-profit, all entities that have been working with grants, really, you've been doing this. You've been dealing with a lot of different nuances in your grants for a very long time. So don't let these nuances limit you from taking advantage of these new guidelines. You can successfully navigate it. It's a matter of making sure everyone is aware of these different changes and they're provided adequate training on this. With that, I think we have our last poll.
Thanks, Anita. Yes. Poll question number 4. After attending this webinar, do you feel prepared for the upcoming changes? A, yes. B, no. C, almost there, but need to review amendments to existing awards. C, I'm still not sure and will likely need more help to get ready. Once you have completed all CPE requirements, you will be able to download a PDF of your CPE certificate from the CPE progress window. And we'll give people just a few more moments to respond. All right, here are the results.
All right, I'm glad to see only 3.5% said no, but most people said yes or almost there and just need to review amendments and existing awards. That's great. And that does lead us to our final takeaways for this. We highly recommend those of you that already answered it correctly, review those amendments to your existing awards and review your new awards, because like HHS, there might be some new awards that only specify certain revisions are applicable and not all revisions are applicable. So making sure that you're reviewing that is going to be important. Consult with your auditors or accountants to discuss exceptions to your existing awards, especially as they're being codified as we get more information. Federal agencies, you know how quickly they move. I say that jokingly, but it's going to take a while for federal agencies to issue everything related to all of these, codifying all of the revisions. So instead, what you'll be seeing is these revisions being implemented through new awards that they issue or through amendments that they issue. So making sure that you're staying in touch with all of the knowledgeable people, from your awarding officials to your auditors and your accountants too. And then update your policies. Take advantage of these guidelines, update your policies, and then train your folks on the new policies. That's a big one. So we have a few more minutes left, and we left that on purpose because we knew that there will be quite a few questions coming in on this, and we're seeing I see that there's question number 55 just popped up. So there are quite a few questions. Let's see.
I have a good one here. Is there a penalty? Is there a penalty when audits are not completed within the required time frame? So the answer to that is the penalty is you now become you're no longer a low-risk auditee, which means, and that'll be the case for 2 years, where you are required to, the auditors are required to test more programs, essentially, get higher coverage over your schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And so it will probably cost more. There will be hard costs involved if that's the case. And it's just more work on your side to fix that over the course of 2 years. Also, the federal agencies can kind of do what they want there, right? So they may, not allow you to apply for new grants until your audit's submitted. They may follow up with you. So it can range. There's no really, outside of that one change with the audit, there's no, clear, 1, 2, 3 things that will occur. So that's mainly the penalty.
That's right. And then there's another question that came up about, does that 5,000 equipment threshold apply to tagging and tracking or to capitalization? And that 5,000 equipment threshold that now went up to 10,000, or for tribal governments, you can increase that even higher if your policy says so. that applies to tagging and tracking and disposing of equipment that's purchased with federal funds. The capitalization part of it, and you all will be kind of maybe surprised to hear this, but federal agencies were a little surprised that a lot of entities have kept their capitalization threshold for financial statement purposes at the same level of $5,000 as the equipment tracking threshold. So, because how you capitalize capital assets, that threshold has no correlation to your equipment tracking. So you can have a much higher capitalization threshold if you'd like for your organization. Just make sure that's documented in your capitalization policy.
We got one question here from Ray, or Ray Ann. So if we are on a calendar year, do the new thresholds go into effect on January 1st, 2025? The note on slide 10 is a little confusing. Okay, so they go into effect on your fiscal year, or if you are on a calendar year in this situation, for those years that began after October 1st, 2024. So for you, it would be the year beginning January 1st, 2025. So I think that answers that.
Yep. There's a question that came up about the new single audit thresholds, and will that impact the number of programs that auditors would be looking at? And yes, that's definitely the case, because auditors will be looking at, the major programs will now be increasing from 750,000 to $1 million, and same with the Type B threshold that also increases from 187 to 250. So the types of program auditors look at which programs they'll be auditing your programs for will be changing for sure. There's one that came up, what is NOFO? Matt talked quite a bit about this. It's the Notice of Funding Opportunities. It's when you get notified by the federal agencies, send out notices that there's a new funding opportunity that you can apply a grant application for. Matt, should we do one more?
What is the new MTDC reference in slide 24? So the modified total direct cost is what's used with that, is what that's referring to. And this is really relating to your, if you're taking that de minimis rate, that's how it's calculated. There's specific language in there that you have to follow when you're calculating that rate, and that excludes the new $50,000 of sub grants. We had another question related to this, which was interesting because some confusion on does it apply to sub grants or subcontracts or both? Definitely sub grants is what's intended to be reducing that in that calculation. I would say when you have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, there can be all kinds of different cost bases, and calculations used in there. So pay close attention on how that calculation works within your specific cost rate agreement with your cognizant agency. So any other thoughts on that, Anita?
No, I completely agree with you. That's a great way to approach it. One more question. There are a lot of questions popping up, and we won't be able to answer all of them. Some of them are quite long, but we'll be able to answer them. We will respond back to you at some point in the next week. But there's one question that came up of the indirect cost pool not being subject to the uniform guidance for procurement. Is that true for state governments as well, not just tribal? And that's true. That applies to all entities, all non-federal entities. Your indirect cost pool is not subject to procurement requirements. Procurement standards only apply to direct costs, not to indirect costs. one more. I'll just take one more and then we'll wrap it up. So one question came up. So Treasury can apply some of these revisions to the ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds retroactively. I highly doubt that Treasury is going to amend their award for ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds. From what we understand, there's a very low appetite in Congress to make any changes to COVID-related funding or even provide extensions on COVID-related funding. So I doubt that Treasury will be updating this to revise it to implement the new revisions, given that ARPA is almost coming to a close with the obligations due by the end of this year. So I wouldn't bet on Treasury making changes to ARPA SLFRF funding. All right. With this, I will hand it over to Laura.
Great. Thank you, Anita and Matt, for a wonderful presentation today. Like she mentioned, if we didn't have time to answer your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. Feel free to reach out to either of our presenters if you have any additional questions. We also invite you to visit our website for more resources and information on this topic, many of which are linked in your handouts window. Also, please be sure to join us next week for our next webcast, Fall 2024 Not-for-Profit Accounting and Auditing Update, and on November 19th for our webcast, Strategic Co-Sourcing of Internal Audits in Higher Education. As a reminder, if you attended today's presentation in a group and would like to receive CPE credit, you must complete the group attendance sheet found in the slide deck and handouts window. If you participated as an individual and met all certification requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. I'll keep the webcast console open for a few minutes to give you time to download your CPE certificate. A copy of your CPE certificate will be emailed within 3 weeks should you have any difficulty downloading it now. Finally, here is a link to a survey for today's presentation. Your feedback is always appreciated. Again, thank you for joining us, and take care, everyone.